Welcome to BizBytes, brought to you by ComTogether, helping businesses like yours build their brand through telling amazing stories to engage and grow audiences on multiple platforms. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of BizBytes. I have a special guest with me today that I've got to know a little bit over the last year or so. And I know that he's going to make a fascinating guest for us this afternoon or whenever you are listening to the program. So welcome, Neil. And as we like to do, I'll let you introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, thank you, Anthony. It's great to be along. I'm the managing director at ContactRight, and I also am a board member at a company called Recruit For Us. ContactRight is where my day-to-day activities lie, my passion lies. During my corporate career, I've worked across a lot of industries, not limited by the building construction industry, manufacturing, business performance improvement, FMCG. And what I have done and built upon was consulting in the contractor compliance space. That's where my last 15 or 16 years have been involved. And it all came about because of a need to find a solution for a client who was under investigation from the ATO, a need to find a solution to the engagement of labour within his business. And effectively, that's been my focus for the resulting period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How sometimes circumstances lead you down a particular path, and then suddenly you find yourself in it with a business that you didn't imagine that you'd have only a few short years before.
You know, Anthony, that's so true, and it all came about when I'd gotten out of the the hurly-burly of the corporate world, and my background was strategy. And I was working with a building company, helping them unravel some issues with their marketing and the direction the building was taken from a strategic point of view. And the ATO investigator was actually in the office doing an audit relating to GST. And he turned around to the managing director and he said, all these people you've got over here working as contractors should really be employees. You better do something about it. And the MD, Richard, turned to me and he said, goodness me, what does that mean? Well, that set me on a journey of discovery in understanding the various rules, regulations, the Tax Act, and everything that relates to the now deployment of non-employment-based labour. Over the years, our model has grown and changed, and we do different things from just compliance of 15 or 16 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's the interesting thing, isn't it, that the workforce has changed quite dramatically. And, the obvious thing that people talk about is the work from home. I know from a personal point of view, I've been spending time working from home for such a long time that nothing changed when COVID happened because I'd already been working full time from home for some years. But even when I was employed years ago, I was able to have that opportunity to do it when it was kind of frowned upon in many respects. But now it's become almost a demand from a lot of workers to have at least some time working from home. But it's also changed the nature of the relationships, therefore, between employers and employees and how that, might function, because that traditional model of you go to work in an office 9 to 5 doesn't really, it does exist to some extent, but it doesn't need to follow that format anymore.
It's interesting you say that. There was an article in the Weekend Australian a fortnight ago, which was saying that a lot of businesses are moving back to contracting labour. And that might be for short-term projects. And the actual the most interesting part was that the article actually recommended that people consider this because are there is the ability for those people to actually earn more in a short space of time, but also be able to move on to other contracting work because businesses were moving away from looking at traditional employment. I found it quite a fascinating article. Whilst there were issues relevant to, like you say, working from home, the notion that that was going to be the norm is changing. What businesses are finding is that productivity is decreasing, not exponentially, but because people are actually missing the office buzz, the communication. They're finding that interactions are still very important. However, I do say there are obviously people like yourself that have been working from home and do it from home quite successfully. One of the other things that's occurred, Anthony, that I find interesting is that businesses that I'm talking to and are approaching us are actually under pressure to pay people more when they're not able to. They don't have an ability. You know, their people are finding it tougher with interest rates going up and inflation to live. So businesses are looking for options, and it's quite interesting that in one of our models we can actually ethically show that it's possible to re-engage labour or engage new labour and save money and pay the people more. It's something that has become a little bit of a phenomenon. And let me example how that came about, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah, we worked with a company some years ago doing some compliance work, re-engaging people, making sure that everything was lawful, ethical, and met the tax office and industrial relations requirements. And the executive I was talking to was saying, look, our growth has been so slow. We get under pressure for people to be paid more, and we just don't have an ability to do that. And he said to me, is there an alternative? Well, we built some spreadsheets and we showed him that managed contracting was a very viable option. And, we worked with that company to put that model into place for some people, not for everybody. Now, that was a few years ago, and we let that lie until probably a year ago when a company that we were talking to said, look, we're under real pressure. We're having to shed people. We are in a position where, we've got people we want to keep, but we can't afford to pay them anymore. And I said, well, look, we did work with the model some years ago and we're actually going to revamp it. So what we did was I hired the services of an industrial mathematician, got a group of people together, and we built an interesting bit of IP, which is a calculator that allows us to determine the benefit of offering an individual a different way to be deployed within a business operation. And that's a managed contractor. They're paid more. There are productivity improvements that become apparent. And the calculator actually gives us a clear data-based comparison between employment and managed contracting as far as it affects the business and saves them money and also pays that individual more. It's fascinating. The data is provided by the client. We don't invent it. So they have ownership of the results. So it's an interesting phenomenon. We're building that into a model which actually sits outside of the award system. If a business is having difficulty with complexity, we can eliminate that. So it's a different view on the contracting model.
Yeah, and I think it is a really important point, isn't it? Because traditionally, the model for employment is pretty simple in that you pay them a salary, that you have holiday
Hmm.
leave, superannuation, sick leave,
Hmm.
entitlements, etc. On top of that, it's a package. Sometimes there are some other entitlements in there to that
Hmm.
may move that package slightly in
Sure.
terms of its value worth, but it's a package. And what that means is that the employee is basically in the hands of the employer.
Yes.
That
Yep.
it's that
Hmm.
traditional idea of you go to work and you do what you are told within reason and you operate within that environment. The challenge that I think that you've started to address is this idea that people as employees want a little bit more control. And one of the challenges that I think that happened during the COVID period was that many people decided that they would create their own business. But in effect, all they really did was create another job for themselves.
Mm.
So the idea of now moving back into a fully employed role doesn't necessarily appeal, but the idea of contracting has some significant advantages for people, doesn't it? I mean, it's not just the
Sure.
business's benefit; it is a win-win scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Though there are some factors, and I think that's to be clear as well, that by being a contractor are taken out of the equation, that benefits that you might get as employed, and you have to weigh those two things up.
The other way to look at it, Anthony, is that as an employee, you pay an individual, for 260 odd days of the full year, when in effect they're not productive for many of those days. 20 days annual leave and public holidays, and you have all sorts of other leave entitlements. One of the things that we've noticed is that some businesses have people that don't take holidays, so they have accruals on their balance sheet,
Mm-hmm.
and those people, even though they don't take holidays, still want to be paid more income. So it's possible to totally move those balance sheets items, with annual leave, etc., pay them out effectively in a contracting model, where the individual is paid for the days that they work, or however it may be structured, and productivity increases. They get more money because they're paid at a higher rate, and their outcomes are better managed. So we're building some quite interesting business models specifically tailored for a particular industry or a particular project. It's quite fascinating how you can actually show a person that they have significant gains, and a business has significant gains in a real win-win. So
Mm.
that was the feasibility behind the calculator in building quite a sophisticated model. And it's interesting, in all of the people that we've worked with their data thus far, um, not one of them has said the outcome is not correct. In fact, I had an engineer who knew the cost of his labour, his employed labour, and we compared how we arrived at our calculations using his data, and he pulled out his spreadsheets, and there was about a 1% difference. So it was quite amazing.
Mm.
But a lot of businesses don't think that way. They don't rationalise the total cost of employment and think about productivity and how you can increase the revenue of the individual, their income and their earnings, but also remove balance sheet items and save the business money. It's logical, but not necessarily recognised.
I think that one of the reasons that that happens is a reason that a lot of things happen in business and in personal life as well, that there are certain things that we don't tend to challenge. We do what we've seen and what we've noticed happening over the years, whether it's other our peers or whether it's our family, and that's we make decisions based on those ideas. So you're in business, you need help, so you employ someone, and you employ someone in that traditional way. And I think that the more that people stop and question the logic behind their own decisions, the more that they will see that they're open to other ideas. Now, it doesn't mean that contracting is right for every business, and I'm sure you'd be the first to say it's not.
That's
But
correct.
but certainly worth the consideration. Whereas I think that's one of the byproducts now that's happening of all of the changes that have occurred over the last couple of years in particular, is that people have to start and stop, I should say, and re-examine their decision-making process. What is any decision actually based on? Is it actually based on what are the options in the marketplace, or is it based on an internal bias? And more often than not, the answer is the internal bias.
It's interesting you say that, Anthony. When I look at the people we're talking to, the business owners, the general managers, CEOs that we're talking to today, it's interesting. They fall into different categories, and they are thinking differently. For example, we might talk to someone or a business that's under pressure to raise the wages, but they don't have capacity. Well, we have an option for them. Or a business that is enmeshed in the complexity of award inhibitors. Ethically, they want to move outside of those inhibitors, not pay people less, but have more operational flexibility. We have a way of working with them. There is also businesses that may want to move away from a traditional form of employment and engage contractors, but want to do that ethically and lawfully. Well, we have a way to work with them. So it's an interesting world in industrial relations at the moment. We have a lot of pressure being put on businesses to change, for example, casual employment into more permanent employment. That doesn't suit every business model. So those people have to rethink perhaps how they engage their labour. And again, we have a solution, but it's not for everyone. We're not an across the board, yes, well, we can walk on water type of business. No, we're very ethical and very selective with who we work with. And there has to be a rationale for a business to be thinking differently and needing to change. So we're not a solution for everyone, but we certainly enjoy a pretty good following.
Well, I wanted to also take a bit of a step back from that to understand the journey of how you got to there. So take me back to early days.
Okay.
Whether it's high school or university or where it was, what was the original dream? What did you want to get into? Because I can't imagine it was this.
That's interesting. I grew up in Melbourne, had a good education, and I'm grateful for something that my dad did. Every school holiday insisted I went to work, when I was, near a teenager, to work with one of his mates. So over the years, I dug holes with Reg the plumber. I worked on car repairs with Jack the mechanic, went painting and wallpapering with George and his team. And these experiences taught me some really wonderful life and thinking skills and kept me off the streets. However, there was one adventure that I'll dwell on later. After year 12 and an attempt at university, one of my dad's contacts teed me up an interview at BP Australia, and I was offered a cadetship. One of the toughest gigs at BP's internal sales department was to manage complaints about heating oil charges and deliveries. It was tough, and it had been a revolving door of young personnel who couldn't handle the stress and pressure. And individuals didn't last a really long time, 3, maybe 6 months in that role.
Wow.
I was thrown into it, and after 18 months, they decided to move me to another area. Frankly, I'd done a great job and learned a great deal in the process. I was very fortunate that my boss, Norm Batters, he was a true gentleman. He understood public relations, and that people were very critical to the success of his area of sales. And he used to recommend reading material to me. You know, sharpen yourself up, lad, was his general approach. And he lent me some of his books. And the one that really changed my thinking was The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale.
Mm-hmm.
So much so, I gave the book back to Norm and decided to resign and seek a role in direct sales. And this is where my dad's insistence on, working and over school holidays came in. I'd actually spent some time working for a guy called Hugh Oliver, who was one of the founders of Oliver Hume Real Estate in Melbourne. And during my school holiday work, I was fascinated by the project research and development aspects of their business model. So when I left BP, I asked Hugh if I could have a job, and he said, "Yeah, come on board." And he was a fabulous mentor. He taught me a lot about life and also about running a business. And unfortunately, Hugh passed away in his early 50s, and I was left with a decision to make as his family decided to sell the business. And at that stage in my late 20s, I was brash and full of self-belief. And in spite of
That's unusual for a 20-year-old, isn't it?
yeah, well, in spite of family objections, I decided to leave Oliver Hume and strike out on my own. And it was a bit like I didn't know how to fly. I didn't know that I couldn't fly, so I did. Over a number of years, I built a very successful business around project research and development. And it was during that period of time, my parents actually moved to Queensland. So I was blessed with holidaying with them. And the itch to move became too great. So I sold the business, moved to Queensland, and this took me in a different direction into the corporate world, working overseas, taking time to study an MBA with a focus on strategy. And it was through various national and international roles that I developed the understanding of a very strategic approach to business. And ultimately, when I decided through too much travel, too much pressure to get out of the corporate world, I set up my own business in strategy and business improvement. And that ultimately took me into the contract and compliance space. So that's pretty much a nutshell of where I've come from, Anthony.
I love the journey, but I particularly love the idea of what your dad did in picking and choosing these different friends to really hands-on kind of stuff. So what did your dad do?
My dad was a regular army officer, very very big on discipline and making sure that idle hands didn't get themselves into trouble, I think.
Well, and certainly getting you some hands-on approaches in a few different different industries there, and it's an incredibly great perspective to have, because I think of those kinds of businesses that you named in those early days, all of those businesses traditionally have quite often operate on contracting kind of levels, very much people focused and about they've I guess to some degree the exceptions to the rules in that the majority of people think about business as going into a place and doing stuff, whereas when you are a painter, plumber, etc., you're going out to other people's places all the time, so you have some of that flexibility that in terms of, where you might stop and have lunch
Mm.
and all of that kind of thing along the way. And so I think that whole idea of seeing what things could look different has obviously, had a long-term impact on you in terms of where you've taken this, this current business.
Well, it's interesting, Anthony. I really bless my dad because he had the foresight to think, well, build a skill base, build a base out of those experiences as a young man, and they proved to be beneficial. We built a boat, I built a ski boat. We spent a lot of time on Phillip Island in Victoria, and some of the skills that I learned in mechanical and being forced to use my hands, so to speak, created a thinking process, a logic, if you like, and that's stood me pretty well over the years. So, yeah, I do owe a lot to my dad and building those can-do attitudes and skills in me.
Yeah, it's amazing what impact our parents can have in terms of the way they work and what you do. And I think there are two ways that it happens. It either exactly like you've had, where probably some similarities there in terms of a very hands-on and roll up the sleeves and learn from that. My father was a pharmacist. Completely the opposite of one another, where for every bit of logic that he has, I'm just creative. But we learnt early on in the piece that our career paths were not going to be the same. But still, I spent a fair bit of time working in his pharmacy and learning things and learning about people and seeing how that interaction happens and that personable approach. And I think there's such a big influence that our parents can have on the way that our careers turn out. And I find it endlessly fascinating hearing those stories and the impact that it's had. I wanted to wrap things up by asking a question that I guess I kind of put to most of our guests on the program. It's about an aha moment that clients have with you, and I think from what you've spoken about today, that clearly there is a potential aha moment that when they go through a calculator, but I'm thinking that is an initial burst. It is the more of the aha moment that happens is once this thing is actually starting to work for them, that they're actually seeing the results. Because it's one thing, the financial side is one thing on paper, but it's the results of what happens with the person that is now working for the business that is probably the greater aha moment, I would imagine. And it's one that I guess you would want more people to understand now that that's something they're going to have.
Anthony, look, I couldn't agree more. The bottom line is the bottom line, and when we, because of the nature of our model, we have very long relationships with our clients. They last years, so we are able to physically see the benefit of those relationships, and we certainly get some extraordinarily positive feedback. There is another aha moment that comes before that, and it's the aha moment that is encompassed by the thinking that there is no option to engage labour other than by employment. And when people find out that there are options and that they do have significant benefits attached to them, it's an aha moment. And again, not everybody sees it that way, but those that do very much embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Neil, I know that lots of people will come to you and have those aha moments, particularly
Yes.
as time goes on, because I think the model that you have is one that really needs to be considered by anyone that's employing people and to work out if it's right for them or not. But I think the point is that it's a model that's definitely worth considering. And
Sure.
I think that ultimately people all round are the ones that benefit. This is not about trying to, I guess, rort a system and write it in a particular way to grab some financial benefit. It's not that at all. It is a different way of thinking, and it's one that does benefit everybody and in the right circumstances. And I think it's a terrific initiative, and I definitely we will be putting in the show notes, as we always do, all the ways and means to get in contact with you. And
Sure.
I encourage people to spend a bit of time and talking to Neil. I know I have done that over the last year or so, and will continue to do that. There's one other little thing that I would certainly like to mention of Neil. He's a terrific networker, and has this endless degree of people that he can hook you up with. So I think that I encourage you all to reach out to Neil, and thank you so much for being a terrific guest on BizBytes.
Hey, thank you, Anthony. And there's one thing that I think is excellent about what we do. In certain circumstances, we let the calculator do the talking, not ourselves. Hey, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure. And everyone, stay tuned for the next episode of BizBytes coming soon. BizBytes is brought to you by ComTogether for all your marketing needs, so you can build your brand, engage audiences on multiple platforms. Go to comtogether.com.au, follow the links to book an appointment for a free consultation.